we have prepared come from the discussions and inputs from more than 50 experts coming from the region and EU member states, from civil society, but also representatives of the private sector, academia, as well as national institutions and governments. When we started our work, we took into consideration that the topic access to a single market can be taken a bit broadly if we want to discuss how we are going to improve the economies, improve the policies and public finance management in order to be prepared for EU membership. So our work with the paper that I hope you all read covers not only access to the single market, but also the need for more funds that will be discussed tomorrow, and also improved economic governance in the countries of our region. Today, we focus on this first part, access to a single market, which is part of the growth plan that was presented by President von der Leyen. And when we started discussions, probably in the same time with this announcement, it was good to hear that we are in line with the ongoing policy discussions in Brussels. So our recommendations can contribute on how they frame the growth plan in terms of access to the single market. The main proposal is directed to the European Union, to the European Commission in particular, and it states that we expect the Commission to present a plan with a feasible timeline to allow immediate access to the EU single market of the Western Balkan countries in all areas that will not impose high adjustment costs and be beneficial for the citizens and businesses in view on full accession. So I'll break down the main recommendation on what was the line of thinking when we were developing. The first term that we have to break down is the immediate access. We are more than aware that this cannot happen overnight. The first step is to ensure that the countries are prepared to implement the acquis. That's why a major recommendation goes to the Western Balkan countries. The unequivocal commitments, not just political statements, but implementation is needed to meet the criteria. And this does not go as a recommendation only for the top level management or the governments. This goes to all institutions that are important and relevant for the implementation of the single market acquis. This goes to the parliament that has to adopt legislation, changes in legislation, new laws to accelerate the adoption of the acquis so we can have as immediate as possible access to the single market. The second point is, what do we mean by high adjustment costs and the areas that should be covered? We are aware that full access to the single market, this was something pointed out in our advocacy activities as part of the Berlin process, that it can damage the economies. But the SAA serve as an example that preferential treatment can be provided for the countries in the region. Safeguard clauses can be put in agreements, so to ensure that neither the Western Balkan countries' economies suffer, neither the EU countries' economies suffer. And definitely, we don't think that when we hear about high adjustment costs, or what we heard earlier today, the painful reforms, we really don't think that this plan should protect national champions, particularly state-owned institutions in candidate countries or accession countries, nor postpone implementation. And the last part is something that in the previous panel was pointed out by Adi, is how beneficial and how visible this plan have to be for the businesses. Our recommendation is definitely to don't have a fragmented approach. Currently, we have very fragmented institutional framework on how do we access single market or integrate into single market in different areas. It's the SAA, the sectoral agreements in transport and energy. And it's hard not only for the businesses and citizens to understand, but also to monitor and implement these policies and keep the institutions and the governments accountable on all matters. And because the Berlin process has gave birth to the common regional market, we thought about this aspect, and we think that any access to the granted access to the single market should be tied with implementation of the common regional market, but not with a slow pace as we have seen, and to definitely receive the full benefits that come from the single market. The roaming agreement, the liberalization on telecommunication is an example that we don't have full roaming like home with the EU, even though we have implemented that in our region. So it should be fully implemented and have the all freedoms. Another and last point that we want to point out is that conditionality has to be tied to this plan, but very targeted one. In all areas where we would, as countries, get access, there should be targeted measures that have to be followed up. And definitely the Berlin process can support this plan, particularly the Western Balkan countries, in accelerating reforms, particularly the countries that participate through twinning projects and bilateral cooperation to support transformation of the institutions. And just to reflect again on the overall idea that access to the single market will not make our countries, our economies competitive by themselves. These reforms need financing. The companies that should go through the pain, not only the administrations, but the companies that should go through the painful reforms or the costly reforms, to be more precise, need some financial support. And that's why we think that the EU should increase the funding and provide more funding in these areas. And lastly, we think that the economic governance process and the mechanisms that exist with the EU should be implemented in the Western Balkan countries as well, to be kept accountable on how the funds are spent through streamlining EU funds for structural reforms. The economic reform programs are the instruments that are replicated for the region. So this is the area that we need further integration as well. That would be, in short, all the work that we have presented, and I'm looking forward to hear what our speakers have to say about these recommendations.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you very much. And thank you also colleagues who have put in their efforts and their expertise into preparing this paper. As you said, more than 50 people has worked on this from various, not only NGOs, but also representatives of the business and academia. So the concept of today's panel is that we have practically two rounds of the discussion. The first one being focused on the, let's say, general perspective on the proposals put forward and their feasibility, and how each panelist sees them from their institutions or organizations' perspective. And the second one more detailed into ways going forward. We did start late, but I didn't get notification that our panel will be shorter, so I think we will have time for everything. Let me start with our first distinguished panelist, Ms. Rita Tabacu, the Member of Parliament of Albania. How do you see the recommendations that were put forward by the civil society, and how do you see their feasibility, and what needs to be done in order to be put in action properly?
Thank you very much also for having me here, but also for sharing the report before. Just yesterday, with colleagues from the region chairs of European integration of the 6 Western Balkan countries, we started a discussion, and one of my friends and colleagues, Mr. Ademi from Skopje, is here. We started a discussion on the roles of Parliament on the Berlin process. It was mentioned, but also part of the report was the legislative side of everything needs to be approved at the end of the day in Parliament. And this is the normal work that we do. Approximation of legislation is part of our mandate, and we do it regularly. Albania is in a good stage in terms of approximation of legislation for, in general, around 70%, specific areas up to 90%. The problem that we have is in terms of implementation of this legislation. I wanted to focus on two specific issues which are related also with the presentation and are part of the work of parliaments, and also a new initiative that we are starting right now. The problem that we are having right now is a wider discussion on the implementation of the SAA and the legislation that needs to be approximated. This process up to now has been considered a very political, government-oriented one. A lot of laws that come to Parliament are not widely discussed, little transparency in the lawmaking procedure, but also for the beneficiaries. It was mentioned here, some of the reforms have to be painful for those who will implement those. I will give you a specific example that we had during last session. A specific law on wineries, for example. It took our committee around 6 months to discuss and approve it, because when we started to do consultations with the companies who would implement it, we understood that they were not consulted in the first place to implement the new standards for alcohol percentage, for capacities of businesses. They needed at least 2 years for investment. And at the end of the day, they were not ready to implement the legislation as it was. So even though the Parliament does approve the law, and we do very well in the checklist that this legislation is approximated, at the end of the day, it's very difficult for stakeholders, for businesses, for society to start implement it. So this would require that the process is all-inclusive since the beginning. And Parliament and approximation of legislation is not considered as a part of a job that we just have to do it. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, the ones who will implement the legislation will have to bear the cost, but also the responsibility of the standards, norms increased and improved. Secondly, we have started now a new process for the post-legislative scrutiny of all the laws that have come to Parliament related with the approximation with EU. And we understood that this is the first time it's being done. So we approve legislation to approximate it with EU, but in practice, we never see how these new norms and standards are being applied. And if these new norms and standards, at the end of the day, do they change the reality? Do they help businesses to improve the situation? Are we now in a better relationship with the markets? Are we part of a bigger market? Can the products, services, companies compete not only in the region, but also with other in EU countries? And we are starting with a very simple law, the law on tourism, which everyone agreed on. If we tried on something very political, we would have had a fight since the beginning. So we said, let's do something that everyone agrees on. And this is a second issue that we are actually experiencing, and is related with the market and problems with implementation of legislation. Thirdly, there is a clear, of course, problem with different economic indicators in the region. GDP per capita, inflation rate, even this year, investments, average salary, which are conditions that we have to take in consideration when discussing on economic reforms, when discussing on a growth plan. Not all countries start from the same basis. So this taken for granted that we all start from a different starting point, and we all need a different momentum for reforms. The last reform I approved in Parliament was in 2016, if I'm wrong. It was the justice reform. Since then, no package of economic or whatever reform has been approved in Parliament as such. We do single initiatives. We do initiatives that, of course, target areas related with the common regional market, with a single payment area, but none of it comes as part of a bigger reform program. Coming to the initial discussion on the start of each of our countries. And to close with rule of law, which is one of the issues that you mentioned in your report. Rule of law as a prerequisite for economic reforms, for reforms that are related with the internal market, and not only. It is true that there have been changes. Albania, Western Balkans of today is not the same of some years ago. And these changes are mainly related with reforms in terms of implementation of rule of law. But we have to see this also in the broader perspective of the market and what it offers to companies, to businesses, and how this can be used for the potential of the region. Let's face it, the 18 million people, even less now, of the Western Balkans, with 3% of the GDP of Germany and half of the Czech Republic, are of course important, but we are much more important. We will do much more better if we do not only integrate between ourselves, but we start these reforms to approximate and integrate with the European market. So these are some initial thoughts related with the process with Parliament. I think I got more than 4 minutes.
Well, thank you very much. Actually, you have mentioned some of the main points, like all inclusiveness in the process, something that we from the civil society are advocating for, that we need to bring on board everybody who are actually affected by the reforms that we bring, made by civil society or business representatives, academia, who can bring in important inputs that we're going to discuss a little bit later throughout this panel. And also the monitoring of the impact is something where we do see a role of the civil society as crucial, and the representatives of the business sector as well. The true impact assessment on how these reforms actually affect our lives and businesses, the real life data, how to call them. Going further with general comments on the paper provided and advice on going forward and hurdles that are noticed, I will turn to Mr. Gheta Zülfay, the political advisor of the Office of the Prime Minister in Kosovo. Mr. Zülfay, please give us your opinion about the proposal.
So, thank you. It is great to be here. I have been working in civil society for like 15 years prior to entering the Office of Prime Minister. So I can see both perspectives. So I will be on Monday on the summit, and it is very important that the Berlin process is not talked only by government officials and government representatives, but also from civil society. Where I'll talk directly then about the comments that I have on the recommendations, but perhaps I wanted to tell you how where are we going with these common regional markets, Berlin process, and EU growth plan and membership, which are all in one way or another affecting the progress of each country in the Western Balkans and the region as a whole. As you know, and we have been very public about it, we have fully supported the Berlin process, and we have not supported any other initiative with regard to regional cooperation besides the Berlin process, and simply because this is a process that started when the DG enlargement was closed by former EU President of the Commission back in 2014, and this is the process that kept the region together. It treats all members equally. All Western Balkan states are part of it. And there are EU values, EU rules and standards, and there are also EU funds. Everything else that has been tried does not have all of these. But for more, from 2020, we have also the common regional market, which is at the center now of the Berlin process. But as you have seen, it is also central to the EU growth plan presented by EU President of the Commission, Madame von der Leyen, on the 4-step plan, which part 1 is deeper economic integration of the region and directly referring to the CRM, and then connection with the single market, of course, with conditionality, which we very much welcome. Similarly, we have proposed in 10th of June 2021 something which we called CEFTA, which had at the center addressed the problem of decision-making that we have in the region. As you know, the 3 mobility agreements we have signed last year in Berlin, they were a great achievement, a huge leap forward for regional cooperation. And finally, something that citizens can see, not just the photos of the summit, but something concrete. You know, one of the agreement on ID finally was set to remove visas between Bosnia and Kosovo. You know, so something very tangible, which unfortunately is not happening. So that very concrete thing that the Berlin process brought last year, you know, in Bosnia, 2 out of 3 agreements were ratified, leaving the one on the ID out, showing, you know, restraints we have within the region. And at the center of this will be also these joint committees that we have. You know, for every agreement we have a joint committee within. And for every joint committee, there are members where we'll have consensus voting. And you can imagine now how that voting will go between the Western Balkans, wherever we have a dispute, which we can have, because within the European Union, you don't have agreement for everything. And that's why you have EU Commission issuing infringement proceedings, and they send you to the court and all that. So I think this is important as an entrance to know where we're at, because we'll have a new agreement coming up on Monday. But as we make new agreements, we have to be aware that at the center is the decision-making and the structures that Berlin process has to produce, and now also the EU growth plan, which is coming by the EU. Because this is, to my understanding, this is the first time now that EU will see the region not only vis-a-vis their relations with the EU, but also as a region, how we move together. And this is a complementary process that we need to remove barriers within our countries first, and then connect with the single market at the same time. And here I'll go to the recommendations. So getting the single market all at once, it's almost impossible. Not just that we are not prepared, but that is, you know, what EU has is 70% of its single market. You know, you don't have common decision-making on common foreign and security policy, for example. That's not a very advanced area of EU, but single market is the most advanced area. And that is what EU has to condition all the aspiring countries. And that's not because we don't want it. It's just that I think that it has to be incremental and conditioned with the rule of law. It should be in the center. Membership towards EU is supposed to be transformational, not transactional. Our countries have to transform prior to joining the EU. It is not a way to buy out and to negotiate with EU as a deal. Acquis will be acquis, and you'll have to take it as it is. But there should not be any approach where countries of the Western Balkans somehow get the benefits of the EU without getting the values of the European Union. That's why this is a process where we have to transform our societies, transform our institutions, and that is a responsibility that lies with the governments of each of the Western Balkan 6 countries, but also with the citizens, because it is citizens who vote governments. So I think that that's what we support, an incremental approach. And I think that is also what the EU growth plan is about. They want deeper economic integration within the region, remove barriers and obstacles. So the more we integrate regionally, the more they will offer access to the single market. And that is a huge benefit because the potential for growth is enormous. And independent studies have shown that, if EU is ready by 2030 to accept us, because they have to be ready first, then we will need at least 10% growth each year, to close the gap that we have in terms of convergence with EU. And that's huge development because EU is a moving target. The standards of living also advanced. And, we are not going to do that if we just continue to block each other and continue to even look backwards. If we set our gaze into 2030, then I think we have to gear up and have more agreements, from one summit to the other with one agreement. That's a long way to go towards deeper economic integration. So I'll leave it here, but I have an optimistic outlook, but we need to be more demanding also as a civil society and as citizens towards the governments and what are they doing to fulfill these targets. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for bringing up the transformational topic. And this is not, I think that this goes not only for the Western Balkans, it also goes for the EU in this 2030 timeline that we're now talking about, that obviously we will all need to change, and we will see how this will go with the EU, having in mind, I believe that this will be one of the topics for the upcoming elections in the EU next year, but let's see how that will go. You have also brought up one very important statement, which leads us to the next panelist, and this is that, the more we integrate amongst ourselves within the region, the closer we are going to be to the single market. And this is something that the regional cooperation had in its mind when it was putting together all of the Western Balkans economies around the same table on so many priority topics, first under the Southeast Europe 2020 strategy in 2012, and later on throughout the Berlin process under the common under the multi-annual action plan for regional economic area in 17-18, and later on in 2020, the common regional market. This actually represents the essential integration of the region in order to be better prepared for the European Union and for the single market that we're talking about. In this respect, Ms. Castrati, you have been on board also for quite some time in regional cooperation from different perspectives. What is your take on this and on the recommendations that we have put forward?
Thank you very much. Indeed, it is a great pleasure to join this panel. and in particular for a topic which is very close to our hearts in RCC, in particular given the fact that it builds on the regional cooperation. I would like to say that I'd start from the very first precondition of everything we do, and then this is the political commitment. And it is worth highlighting that what the Western Balkan economies are in a way doing is that the governments are between two very ambitious objectives. One is the strategic political one, integrating to EU, and of course that requires very bold reforms, and in many cases requires expedited ones. And on the other hand, the governments has to also be responsible to their citizens. So they have to think always of a people-centric policies and reforms that bring a change to the citizens' life. And having this in mind, I have to say that the whole perspective of the regional cooperation and what the Southeast Europe 2020 strategy, now 2030 strategy, which builds on the strategic development goals, sustainable ones, but common regional market following the 4 freedoms, in a way tries to bring the whole discussion around the convergence we have with EU and whether we as a region can build towards the main pillars that bring the convergence of the Western Balkans closer to EU. Of course, we still see a very high optimism in the region when it comes to the EU integration. And according to our Balkan Barometer, 59% of the EU, of the Western Balkan citizens consider entering or the membership to EU as a very positive thing for them. But still only 1/3 of the citizens believe that this can happen before 2030. So this means that for all politicians, not only in the Western Balkans, but also in EU, building this trust around the citizens that this is a real thing happening with very tangible results is important. But going back to the governance and to the convergence with EU, I'd like just to quote from a very recent study that OECD did and presented during the economy ministerial meeting in the context of Tirana summit, that the convergence with EU would take from a few decades up to 70 years to the region. And if you just heard what my friend Yeton said, it will bring us to a lot of, it will take a lot of efforts to increase our GDP and to go closer to the standards that EU has. But how can we do this? And of course, first is through the acquis alignment. And despite this is a moving target, and this is something that all the economies of the region have been very much engaged in making the domestic legislation aligned and compliant with the EU acquis, but this is a moving target. And this is something that the faster EU progress, if we cannot make it with the same speed, then we'll always be with a lag behind. The second is our capacities to absorb whatever is happening in EU, and our capacities to go with the same speed and pace towards the EU integration. And of course, this requires boosting of our human capital and increasing the capacities of not only of the bureaucrats, if you want to call it like that, in the institutions, but also increasing the capacities of people and the societies to converge to EU standards and to the rule of laws and to the main and to the core values of the EU societies. And we can do that. And this is also one of the recommendations that I wanted to flag, is by matching what our institutions in the region do compared to what the EU institution do. And our approach to this within the common regional market, but also to all processes that aim to integrate the region, is through matching or integrating further and exposing the institutions and experts from the region with their respective EU bodies. And there are very good practices and examples that could, in a way, help to extend it further to other institutions, like, for instance, the participation of our economies to the EU, to the body of the European regulators for telecommunication sector, or participation as observers in the Data Protection Board, or interoperability working group. So all these examples show that we can learn from our peers in EU, and the better, the most integrated we are and we participate in their work, the easier would be the work for us in this regard. Making the whole work transparent and inclusive is one of the core principles that we in RCC, but not only in all regional cooperation initiatives have. And we are extending, and we are trying to extend this, this inclusiveness not only to, as Ieton said, equal treatment among the six of us, but also inclusiveness in terms of civil society, in terms of private sector, in terms of citizens, to the extent we can. But all this is done based on a very structured, and of course, it requires a lot of, let's say, consideration from the civil society and other stakeholders to make it sustainable over time and to make it workable in a way that it brings very tangible results and concrete ideas. We have also, let's say, tried, and we are trying to bring the local authorities into the whole agenda, because the whole consultation, despite what we do in capitals, where the citizens are in their cities where they live, and the transparency and consultation and participation should start from there. So we're trying to bring the local authorities also in the loop for the integration, and I think that what the civil society suggests into this consultation and transparency in the overall EU integration processes is a very good recommendation, but I have to say that it needs a bit of a more concrete steps how to do that and how to make it sustainable over time, not to be just one good thinking and good wish in the paper, but something that can be implemented in reality. I hope I didn't take more than the 4 minutes, but for the first round, I think that is all. Thank you.
We all did, but we are all okay with time, since I said the organizers didn't cut our panel. We are still okay. Another important stakeholder in the regional cooperation and in the Berlin process and everything that we are doing to help the region integrate itself internally and anticipantly with the EU, CEFTA. Zdravko, how do you see these recommendations and going forward with them from the point of the free trade agreement, which is actually, I think it was the first agreement in regional cooperation, the first, how would I say, the real politically binding and ratified in Parliament's agreement that we ever had in the region?
Yes. I don't know if it's the first, but it's definitely one of the well-known ones. And this is partly because we were not really, let's say, reinventing the wheel. We just jumped in the wagon that already existed for the candidate countries. So for the idea of CEFTA, actually created then back in the 90s, is while the new candidates are approaching closer to the EU, developing a relationship with the EU, that they should in the same time develop the relationship between themselves, with the idea that once you join, you're not just joining the single market with Germany and France, you're actually joining single market with the other candidates as well, now the members. So that's the logic of CEFTA. And we sometimes we made jokes that makes us a bit suicidal organization, because our idea is that we put all our members in the EU. On the other side, the idea of having this access to single market, or better integration to single market, is in essence in the nature of CEFTA, why it exists. So that's why many people around CEFTA actually awaits this proposal from the Commission on New Growth Plan with anticipation and with hope, with a little bit of cynicism as well, which I felt in other panels here, because it's a kind of an overdue promise. You know, we heard about this phase-in negotiations. Nothing happened actually after that. Practically, I mean, we had the investment, economic and investment plan, where there was one chapter dedicated to accession to the single market. Again, there was nothing really felt, as my colleague panelist from the last panel said, it's like nothing that would pass the business and citizen test. So this one, we really hope that this will change. And that's why my first actually comment would be, we need visible benefits behind that plan. And this benefits should be visible and recognized by the ones who use it. These are businesses in terms of trade businesses, but also by people, by citizens, because we do need as well the commitment on the side of the politics in order to move forward. This is something that we expect, and this is something that that we recognize as well in the recommendations that you put there. So visible, tangible, something that we can feel on the ground. The second thing is, of course, that this should be, so this is the question what, and then there is always afterwards a question how. So that's extremely important, because we saw, as I said in the previous episodes of the same discussions, we saw that there was a what, but then they didn't know how to actually put it in practice. And this is extremely important. Part of it is money, I have to admit, because it's not just access. They don't just give us the single market. We're actually opening a two-way highway. And that's why one of the big criteria for accession is to have an economy, to have business community who can actually take up the competition in the EU. So that's why I think that our guys as well need support in order to fight this competition battle on the single market in fair terms. But the second thing is institutional, and there I think that that's something that will ease our job on the part of the regional organizations as well, because many of the WIN-CEFTA, we have number of EU compliant initiatives which we are putting together and implementing. And where we, in discussion with our EU friends, we said, okay, we are interested in having the same thing with you guys. And they told us, but we don't have the institutional means. And I read in some of your recommendations and as well in some of the papers that you were building on that there are very interesting ideas that I hope you shared with them about this wider interpretation of the SAAs and as well setting up new instruments. But this is extremely important. And finally, I want to wrap up this discussion basically by making a reference to my two previous colleagues who said that this is a tool of convergence, and we need a strong boost in order to catch up with the development in the EU. And I remembered while you were talking, actually, I remembered a paper which was a study which was done by the World Bank, which examined what would happen if we deepen CEFTA, for example, to the level of the single market, and they said we can boost the GDP growth by up to 7.6, and this is something we used in our CRM paper. But if we link it with the EU and the single market, this goes from 7% to 15% for basically all parties. So this is how powerful it can be if we use it properly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, I would agree with you that there is an abundance of possibilities. And actually, I want to thank all of the panelists for stressing out business and people, business and citizens, because at the end of the day, it's all about them. And Zdravko, yes, I agree with you with abundance of possibilities of the single market for our region that go beyond the political decisions of this paper, that they actually have real implications for business and life. For an example, we have now a situation of the majority of the region joining the single market program for SMEs, where we are going to have the direct. I think that a couple of weeks ago, when I was checking the last time, it was only Albania left to join, I hope this year. But given that the whole of the region has been joining successively each month or a couple of months, I believe that we will circle the whole region with this single market program for SMEs, where our businesses, especially small and medium size, can have direct support of the EU funds and even the technical support that they need for getting closer to the single market. Also, some of the implications on our citizens in terms of costs of the utilities that we're paying for, then this will be discussed, I think, in one of the other panels that is dedicated to the energy, is possibly having the region having the position in the ETS for the electricity market, which will have the direct implication on the costs of electricity and the cost of life of people in our region. So these are all the things that we do need to take a look, take into consideration when talking about the single market. opportunities, possibilities, and how to target the priorities which we want to address first. In this respect, I will turn now to the civil sector representative. Actually, I was hoping a business sector representative, but Nena Đurđević is today with us as a representative of the Regional Center for Strategic and Political Initiatives from Belgrade, who have also drafted a study recently on the possibilities and means of joining getting close to the single market. So Nena, please give us your take on this whole work that we have presented and on what you think would be the good ways of going forward.
Thank you very much. And thanks for the audience, patience to listen to us, and thanks for being invited here. Yes, although I'm representing the center here, I currently don't have an amnesia, so also I know what I'm also doing as advisor to the president of the Chamber of Commerce. So I mean, still, there is this kind of knowledge and experience from business sector. So I used and I'm using this opportunity in my life to combine those two. And in this panel, in all the panels, I think that all those that I listened this morning, there is definitely this kind of a feeling and the need to have a new approach of the EU integration. And that's something which everybody agrees. I don't know if you agree how to do that, what is the method, but well, we are here to discuss that. I would think that particular emphasis should be made to the redefining the regional integration and within the broader context of the EU. The proposal presented by our colleagues who emphasize the integration of the EU single market as a very logical and practical step, but it's a step towards EU integration. And we have to, I think, not forget that that means it's a pathway, not an end by itself. And single market access is a pathway to, hopefully, EU integration and to stabilization of the whole this region. So this is a tool, not just an end by itself. I'm sure that if I would speak that to my colleagues from the chamber, they would hear the first thing, and the second part of my sentence they will forget. But the recent events in Banjska in Kosovo with this violent and hideous criminal attack that happened, and with the life of policemen lost and 3 other people killed, culprits killed, shaken the region. Not only didn't shaken only Serbia and Kosovo, but it shaken also I think the whole region and the structure. And again, emphasizing that this, how to say, the security component and political component is very important also for our EU integration. I have to also say that, I mean, economy and politics go hand in hand. We also would like in the chamber something saying its economy is important, but yes, you have also political measures that hinder it. I have to also, just to remind about the ban of import of the Serbian goods from in Kosovo, that very much also influenced Kosovo companies who are relying on half-made products or things that they are putting in their own final products to sell on the market. So what I think it's important to notice, and that's what I said, is that actually the EU integration and regional cooperation should be 2 parallel efforts that go hand in hand, side by side, not 2 separate efforts. And now we are seeing it completely separate efforts. Each country, current framework is like that. Each country negotiates its own path to the EU with SAA agreements signed, conditionality on the list. And this stabilization agreement process is completely separate from regional integration. So you have one process where country, by negotiating, also are taking the acquis communautaire within their own system and hopefully voting for it and implementing it. And then at the same time, they are at the regional level, they are implementing this same framework to the regional institutions, namely in this trade area, CEFTA. And I will be more maybe open and blunt with you, because I don't think that all of you are really aware how this system functions, because those 2 processes are not synchronized. We all know that in past 3 years, CEFTA on a political level is completely blocked. So, and there is no decision in past 3 years that has been voted at the ministerial level of CEFTA. Technical committees prepared many decisions, Zdravko knows it very well, but for 3 years, none. In these 3 years, EU made a lot of decisions, new ones that we are, who knows when we are going to tackle that in this matter. And even if we, for instance, will have understanding the system, they will understand that something is rotten in Denmark. Even if the system is unblocked and the decisions are passed, each of these decisions have a transitional period of 3 years to be implemented. So tomorrow, if we vote, we have for 2 to 3 years the transitional period for most of them, putting us in a bit of a situation where we are really lagging behind of the very initial idea to implement the EU standards and practices in the Western Balkans. Thirdly, each decision has to pass on the 4 layers of decision-making. 4 layers. Each layer of decision-making asks unanimous decision before the adoption. It's a consensus. First level is expert group, second subcommittee, third 2 committees, trade facilitation and committee of points for trade facilitation, and finally ministerial level. So 4 levels of consensus. This is what currently the framework looks like. And I completely agree. And what Zdravko said at the beginning, that was meant when it was created 2007 in a completely different circumstances, political in the region and between the region and the EU. But it was thought this is a temporary mechanism that's going to prepare the countries to actually go to the EU membership through also single market. But and the institutions were like designed at that level. But it showed up that after how many years, the same structure cannot unfortunately hold the political realities of that we live in. And I completely agree with Mr. 𝘉𝘢𝘁𝘀𝘳𝘀. I think that he also pinpointed more or less the picture that I described. It's actually the consensus voting to join committee and all these hurdles. I also read their in 2021 proposal for Southeast European Free Trade Agreement to, how to say, come after CEFTA. Unfortunately, it was not enough, I think, presented in the region, especially not in Serbia, because I think something which really diagnosed the very problem that we are facing in. So for the first, how to say, first intervention, I would say that we need new overall approach to tackle the structural deficiencies of the decision-making, methodological one that separated currently EU integration from the regional integration, and to actually find a way how to enable seamless access to the single market. And then in the second intervention, I will feel free to share with you some ideas how that can be achieved. Thank you.
Very much, and actually, you added a little bit of a challenge here for the regional cooperation and regional integration topic, which I will come back to later on. Right now, I wanted to ask our panelists from the academia sector. What is your opinion on the proposals put forward, and how do you see the role of the academia in contributing to the overall process? Especially in this all inclusiveness that we have mentioned several times during the panel.
I will even add to that inclusiveness now, because some of the actors were mentioned and some were not mentioned because the focus was not on them. We've heard so many aspects and all of them are very important, and still not all the aspects have been covered, as this is the most complex area within the EU agenda. So complexity of the internal market is enormous, and we have 4 freedoms. So it's goods, services, capital, and labor. Here in this policy paper, the focus is more or less on the trade. And it should be like that, because here in this area, we have some experience and we have some progress. But then we don't have only two actors like business and public institutions. We have also EU institutions on the other side. And also we have two layers of relations between EU and member states. So we have EU with member states, bilateral, and we have regional cooperation. So that adds to the complexity. And how to move forward. Within these recommendations that are provided, they're general, but yet specific because they require for an action plan. And in order to get results, not to have just another political developments with regards to the accession to the single market, what is necessary is to make this action plan specific in the areas where progress is really possible in, I would say, a period of 3 to 5 years in order to measure progress. Because there are millions of documents within made by the European Commission, either that reflect bilaterally to the countries or reflect the regional cooperation, and still we know that the implementation is really not strong. So the recommendations are really good in terms of that twinning projects and actual cooperation between the institutions of the side of the EU member states and of the side of the Western Balkans is needed. Then how to make these links between European, bilateral and regional cooperation to function well. That is something that also needs to be responded. And here, again, I would go to the practical aspects of how actually to speed up the integration of the countries to the European Union. Each of the countries with their stabilization and association agreements, they actually have, in a way, have a guidance what to do in what area of a single market. And the implementation of these stabilization and association agreements is really on a different level and speed for each of the countries. So that has to be checked. And another important thing needs to be checked. When we speak about the EU integration, we usually speak about the requests that the EU has towards or from the countries of the Western Balkans. And what about the obligations of the European Union? Because in the stabilization and association agreement, there are also obligations from the other side. In a recent study that we have done with regards to implementation of this agreement of North Macedonia, we came out to the conclusion that we don't have data about reciprocity, how these obligations have been fulfilled by the European Union. So this is, I believe, the field where the civil society as well as academia could raise their voice in order also to ask for the European Union to provide sometimes more specific guidance with regards to specific areas, or sometimes just to be even on their sides more aware that there are areas where we could really progress faster. The other thing that is related to these recommendations is the feasibility of the recommendations and how actually they could be implemented. They're related with lots of resources. And that's why selection of a very specific areas where we could have progress as countries in a relatively reasonable period of time is important. And also it's important for the countries among themselves to understand that they need also to merge their efforts in establishing of so-called regional institutions, but not institutions of a political nature like we have them now, but institutions that would actually support the flow of goods, like regional laboratories, accreditation bodies, and so on. Because when you talk to the private sector, they would say our biggest problem when we enter the EU market are standards and they cost a lot. on the other hand, there are always new demands from the European Commission, which are not because they want to stop to put new demands on us. It's because of the developments on the world stage. The newest one is related to carbon border adjustment mechanism, which will cost a lot. The countries will have to pay a lot in order to make themselves according to the requirements that will be valid in several years. So all this really requires a very gradual approach towards accession to the EU single market. We should not rush to the market, I would say, because it's impossible to rush, but we should go in our speed in order to get there. And if you look at the trade data, and it's mentioned in this paper, that 2/3 of the trade of the region is actually with the European Union. Apparently, the business was aware of the possibilities, and with the framework that the national states provided, they actually did the best they could. So now the idea is actually to turn the politics of accession in order to serve the business, but also the business should be heard as well. And here we come to the actor, or to the side where I come from, that's the academia. It hasn't been used as much as it should be in this EU integration process, and there are lots of possibilities to do that. The first one that comes to my mind reading these recommendations is actually related to making deeper studies related to these recommendations where more specific demands will go to the European Union. So I believe this is the very first step and a very good one. And really congratulations to all the participants that created the recommendations in all the panels. I've seen the materials in order to say that we as region have a common attitudes and we have common demands. But in order to have good results next year to report, actually, we also need support of all the resources available, and many of them work at academia. So this cooperation needs to be strengthened, maybe also through establishment of academic network that would support the EU integration process. And there are also other mechanisms, but definitely the links between all the actors must be deepened. Another thing that I would mention is, and it's in the recommendations, it's actually a link of the overall process of the accession to the EU single market with the economic reform programs. The economic reform programs have been designed to help the Western Balkan countries to select the reforms they need in order to have more functional economies, market economies, and in order to move forward towards this common market. Now, so far, these economic programs, unfortunately, were not very visible in any of the countries of the region. The documents are very good, but their implementations go somehow aside of all the government documents that are going. So these two processes must be linked, and also the reforms must be there, and horizontal coordination. I'm talking this about all the Western Balkan countries, as I have done studies on that, is needed. It's everywhere. The governments are making strategies. They are making many documents that are somehow isolated. And on top of that, there is no link with the available resources. Tomorrow, there will be a panel about the use of funds and resources, but you have to connect all the dots in order to have the result. So this is a really first good step. And this forum, I have participated on the other three, I think. previous ones. It's a very good step in order to provide very specific recommendations. And I see that as several times it was used in a previous panel, the term momentum, as a momentum for the civil society to join also with the academia and to raise the voice in order to provide input that we could do it. This event actually shows that if we think together, we could provide better recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And also thank you for raising the note about the economic reform program, where one of the recommendations is actually to align the European semester with the ERP cycle, which would be very important to do. And we also, yes, the participation of academia is very important. In this, what we like to call the quadruple helix now. It's the institutions, it's the civil society, it's the business, and it's the academia. It's not triple helix anymore, it's the quadruple helix. I would like to note that actually the majority of the second round questions, which I have intended for this discussion, have been all covered in the first part, which leaves us some time for the Q&A session from the floor. And here I will invite the audience to raise any questions or any additional inputs to the study presented, if you have so. Well, yes, please. If you can just please kindly introduce yourself and where you're coming from.
Ardian Hachka, Cooperation Development Institute. During your study, have you had contacts or interviews with representatives from DG GROW?
The paper is a synthesis of the discussions that the working group had, so not really much research has been done. This was the discussion that we had during June on 3 different thematic discussions, where we have heard some inputs from studies, particularly from representatives from academia, from business sector, and from civil society presenting their findings and positions. It is indeed important to continue this work. Having the floor, I would probably reflect on what we have heard till now. Indeed, this is the groundwork, because this is the first time we're discussing this topic, and we felt that it's good to get a step back rather than entering the particularities, given the short time that we had and resources to work on every single aspect that should be part of a more deeper, well elaborated action plan, but to discuss what is the direction that we want to take when we're discussing access to the EU single market or economic development more broadly. So that's why 3 different areas were covered. It's good that we hear that most of the ideas resonate well with the representatives from our countries and from the institutions that work on regional cooperation and economic integration. And we are aware that we have to continue on this topic. Thank you.
Any overlapping with the Open Balkans, CRM with the Open Balkans? Have you seen any contradiction?
Is there anybody of the panelists who would like to answer this question, even though we have some comments already that this would take a second panel to discuss? Let me just give you also my reflection. This paper is actually the voice of the civil society and the representatives of the civil society in terms of which areas we need to address. And I'm personally very happy that we have the representatives of the institutions today, and also the main stakeholders in the regional cooperation, which, as we have said before, is one of the essential ingredients for the future integration with the EU. And it kind of gives me the optimism that these messages will be heard by other decision makers as well in the coming days. And that it will actually pave the way for us in the work going forward, in more detailed work, in prioritizing the exact sectoral priorities, policy priorities, and so on that we would need to address together as the region in accessing the single market. Are there any other questions from the, yes, please.
No one going around. I just wanted to share a couple of comments on the process. 𝘞𝘦𝘴𝘗𝘬𝘢𝘮𝑚 European Policy Institute. I've worked closely with Stefan on the organization of this group. Going back to Ardian's question, I think at this point the directorates in Brussels were more seen as the recipients of the recommendations. So I think it was the point was to digest internally in the region with all of these stakeholders. And really thank you also on behalf of EPI for being here, but we also, while we are talking about the process, we also had expert support from 3 specific input papers, and we should recognize them. So one was Professor Slovana Mojsovska, 𝘈𝘠𝘬𝘪𝘀𝘀𝑗, who helped us a lot from the Macedonian customs, because we tried also to get all of the, as much as we could, institutions that are engaged with this, and this might get me to a comment on the Open Balkans. And also Matteo Bonomi, with whom we actually tomorrow on the panel of the funds address the other element of actually how do we support all of this, these discussions with the discussion on actually accessing more funds just for the process for everyone, because we are very clear on what we did, but this is also kind of a selling point for our panel tomorrow. Thanks. That was it to myself.
Can I also maybe add something?
I'm sorry, microphone. This is being recorded. Let me just check if there are you reflecting on the question, Nenad? I'm sorry.
No, I think that maybe there's also more food for thought, and maybe there'll be some more questions. But if you think of
Yes,
about
we
the
have.
process, we can
Let's
discuss
ask
it.
the audience if the audience has more questions.
I do have a question while I have the mic, if I can point out to one point that was mentioned by Mr. Ilic. In the back of our mind, when we were doing this, it was exactly that link that you made with the 7% GDP rise, if we're talking about the region, and going up to 15 if it's the EU. So if there's any actually ways in which we think that we can strengthen this discussion or convey this more clearly sometimes, because we feel that in many cases, the discussions on the common regional market feel, as much as this is the goal, we really feel that we need to repeat this. So if there's any way from going back to the experiences maybe of the other countries that have left now your group, that are the member states. So if you feel that there are any specific examples we could use or rely on, that's why we're bringing tomorrow speakers so that work primarily in Bulgaria and Romania, it would be very, very valuable to us.
Maybe I will also misuse a little bit just to address also some comments that Nenad made in this slot, but I will be quick. This is exactly what we are doing. So this is we are investing in what we have with our tools. If you go, for example, now to CEFTA's social media, for example, you'll find today, I think it's Montenegro this weekend, we are showing how much, for example, Montenegro benefited from what has already been done. And in our discussions with the businesses, for example, with the Chamber Investment Forum and the others as well, this is it. But the truth is, and I really believe that that the results speak better than any PR campaign. And in that sense, I have to underline what Nenad said about this blockade being gone over will be, as I said, the best campaign ever. But on the other side, I wish really to underline some of the things that when we are talking about what can we repair about ourselves, how can we become better, that we have a clear idea what the problem is. Because I don't think that the problems are represented well in what you said then. So we have a decisions which will, if adopted tomorrow the businesses will have immediate impact. So this is, for example, recognition of authorized economic operators. I see some colleagues here who helped us doing that. So tomorrow, so no 2 years. There are some decisions which are complicated because they are based on, for example, 10, 15 directives of the EU. We see some others, for example, some other initiatives who did not want to go, for example, EU compliant way, let's do it quick and easy. But we have our mandate, this is the EU way, which sometimes requires time, but then this is the quality benefits. And on the other, and finally, I've never seen working more than 4 years in CEFTA that any decision was stuck. It's true. Stuck with it. Yes, stuck between the subcommittees or committees. So it's like at the end, if the political problems are resolved, I think that we have everything up and running.
Thank you, Zdravko. Actually, is there, because I wanted to go to closing remarks, is there a question? Yes, very.
Thank you. Just quick 2 questions. Any ideas in which areas we could ask for early access to the single market, which we currently don't have? And the second one, we heard in Brussels a lot of discussion that there is a lack of legal grounds to grant earlier access to the single market for the Western Balkans. Would you say that what are your thoughts on that? Would you say this is like a justified concern? Thank you.
I will actually pass this question to Vera along with the other question, actually with the challenge that was posed during the panel. There was, Nenad mentioned that the regional cooperation and regional integration are not going in a parallel direction at the moment. And this is something that I would like to see your take on this. And based on the fact that the RCC is actually for years now in various policy areas and priority areas of regional cooperation, which are directly linked with the access to the single market, which would be actually the first priorities, as Maria asked?
Well, thank you, Dragana, for this. Indeed, I want to first comment on how these 2 processes go hand in hand, and these are not going into different directions and are not fragmented in a way that each of the economies is seeing the path of EU integration in a very individual manner. But what we see is that through the regional cooperation and regional agendas, and given we started in 2020 putting the 4 freedoms and EU standards and practices in the core of everything the regional cooperation does, in a way we help all the economies of the region through the regional cooperation to come closer to the EU standards by a peer-to-peer learning experience sharing. And let me just give you an example. Roaming is the best one to say for this. What we started with the roaming first was we integrated among us, and we have a roaming free zone now in the Western Balkans that we pay as being home. And the immediate next step was to integrate further to the EU benefits when it comes to roaming. And now we have from the 1st of October that our citizens and the EU citizens are benefiting from much lower data roaming charges when it comes to the telecommunication. And this is a very specific and concrete example which shows how the regional cooperation can bring us into EU and how this phasing in, although it is one may say that it's still very theoretical how it works. It is an example that shows how the regional cooperation can bring us closer to EU. And in terms of priorities, just to quickly respond to the question, we see in RCC also following all the discussions in the region, at least for us, there are 3 main dimensions which needs to be addressed. First is the trade integration, which of course is not entirely on the RCC, but is jointly with partners in this regard with CEFTA and TCT Secretariat, having a very clear picture on how we integrate in the investment financial market, but also bringing the region into a completely different perspective when it comes to the trade integration. Second is the digital and green transition. And this in particular, it was mentioned here, let's say the challenges of CBAM and the carbon pricing, and in particular the cost that this will have for the businesses as of 2026. And this is not just the energy, although it is perceived as an energy related challenge, but indeed is not. It is broader than that, and it covers other sectors, and it requires a very inclusive discussion and structured one that would address investment in the sector. Just having in mind, for instance, that our economies are 60 to 95% coal dominant in producing electricity generation. So for us, the investment in the sector would be a challenge, for which, of course, the discussion of the EU financing into the whole discussion are of great importance, and the digital transformation, which in particular goes to the digital connectivity and the funds and the investment needed to bring the region closer, integrated among themselves, but to the region. Just to give you a figure that currently what we have in the region in terms of connectivity, we have currently only 48% of the households connected with are covered with high-speed connectivity, while the average in EU is 70. So you can just see how much investment are needed in this regard. And the third, which is also, let's say, transformative in itself, is the human capital development with a great focus on research and innovation. Just to give you an example, the expenditure on research and innovation are only 0.5 or 0.4% of the GDP in the Western Balkans, while in EU are 2.3. And then, despite having a lot of good experiences with the agreement, mobility agreement that we had, extension of these agreements or the approach taken for the mobility of professionals within the region should be extended further to the mobility of professionals in EU through the recognition of professional qualifications, through the access to study for higher education, and all this in a very, let's say, gradual manner for sure, but while having in mind the standards that we are using and in a way copy-pasting whatever is applied in EU, I guess that through the regional processes, and this goes to what Nenad was mentioning, through the regional processes, you go into a more structured integration to EU through standards, practices, and a key alignment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vera. And now, actually, we are coming to the closure of, we have.
Maybe I can ask a question if I cannot comment.
No.
Or I shouldn't be at the panel.
Well, we don't have the time.
For a question? Sorry.
We're closing actually now because another one starts in, oh, I'm sorry. I have the instruction that I have to announce the next panel at 5 o'clock, which starts, which is actually the panel called The Process That Delivers. And we have like basically 1 minute left of this one for a closing statement that I will actually give an opportunity to each panelist just to give us like a very short in 1 or 2 sentences closing statement to our paper, and in that way we will sum up the whole discussion. So I will start with our first panelist.
One, all of us all together, or
one each? One each. I can extend it for 1 minute.
The moderator can sum up.
A lot of food for thought here. Just 2 quick comments on all inclusiveness. We have opened the National Council for European Integration for the civil society to be part in the monitoring and control of reporting of the government. And frankly speaking, going to the second challenge, we have a problem of capacities. We have a lot of civil society organized, engaged in cluster 1, and very few cluster 2, 3, and so on. And this brings me to the second issue, which is institutional capacity, linked with the work of all of us to be on the same lines with not only Berlin process, but also the European integration process. And the last one, I can dwell for more than an hour on the differences between the Berlin process and the Open Balkan, but not to be political here. I hope that the message that is going to be given on Monday and afterwards is that the region does not need any more competitive processes and initiatives that are not mature, that engage energies and resources, and at the end of the day are stopped. So for all of us, it's important, the political will from the Commission, but also from the member countries, to focus on processes with tangible results. And in this regard, having in center the citizens, it's a very good outcome coming from the Berlin process summit on Monday.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Zulfay, your final thought. Very short, please.
Yes, well, I agree with recommendation on more transparency for the process. That I think would lead us to more questions for the next year on what we're doing. But I'd say that if we focus all our energy into working together and with the mindset that we all belong within the European Union, then I think would have less problems and would channel or work towards removing the barriers. And that requires political will and a different strategic orientation, which I don't think is shared among the six. Yes, some have this strategic vision and believe strongly in the European Union, but not all. And that, I think, is interfering with the flow of everything that we're doing. And I think that is something to look at. And the other, I agree with the CEFTA problems, but they just explain how difficult it is, this decision-making process and the lack of structures. So I think within the Berlin process, we can finally address the decision-making that is impeding the speed on how fast we move towards deeper integration. So I think that is something that we should work more seriously for the next summit.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Vera and Zdravko. From the regional perspective, your closing statements, please.
I'll be very short and I'll say that what we need in this whole process is to have accountable processes and let's say the whole togetherness and working together while learning from our weaknesses and strengths, because what makes us stronger in achieving results, of course, is much better than what makes us weaker. So we have to see what makes us stronger than what makes us weaker. And for sure, having a region a whole, of course, it's much better than having each part of it working independently and individually. So I would close by saying that only if we join forces and see the processes as contributing one to the other, we can make the real change. So that's my closing sentence.
2 points just from my side. I think one is that we need to keep all the time at our horizon people and businesses. This is not just a political thing that needs to create some virtual space. It needs to create concrete results, concrete people. But on the other side, it depends on politics. That's why we have Berlin process. That's why the leaders are meeting on Monday. This is somehow what is European Council for the European Union. We looked at our leaders and the leaders in the EU, which meet on Monday to give us. And in this context, we have to reinvent ourselves. We have to make ourselves better all the time.
I will just start with by not agreeing more than what Mr. Zulfay said, political advisor to Prime Minister Kurti. Decision-making process need to be reorganized. We have to find agreement how. We have some ideas, and I think what are the ideas? We need to actually have a political, high-level decision-making body at the regional level. I call it high-level political steering committee, comprised by the prime ministers, at the highest level, who are deciding and steering the process of regional integration. In addition, in this body, there should be an EU commissioner sitting together with them as a link to the EU integration. This body is deciding about policies of the regional integration, of the EU integration, and of the single market access. When they decide how to do that and what are the sectors, because we asked about the sectors, nobody mentioned which sectors, because each country, the Western Balkans, has a different interest for a sector. And we should understand that. I mean, what is the priority? Automotive is a priority for Albania, and tourism it is, for instance, and I don't know, vice versa with Serbia. So the second level, a regional technical committee, a cooperation committee, comprised of the technical level people who are tasked to implement decision of the highest level. Together in the technical committee sits the person from the EU Commission, who is following that this alignment goes with the acquis communautaire. That EU doesn't have only the monitoring position now that they have on CEFTA, but they also have a bigger role, which is they are deciding if there is a dispute among the parties. That person is deciding what is the side who is rightful. So they have a inside activity within the structure. And this is something which is a new impetus for the region. This is something which is new
Nenad, I'm sorry, we have
for the Berlin process. If you don't have that one, good luck with all the summits of the world, and next year in Berlin, to have the old system with
Nenad,
the new
I'm
ideas.
sorry, I'm
Thank
interrupting you, but you have to end, and I think you're referring actually to the prime ministerial platform of the Berlin process and the technical working groups of the CEFTA and the
No, I'm
RCC,
not.
which hold what you have, but
I'm not.
that's maybe for another panel. Silvana, just not to leave you out, in one sentence, just the closing statements, and we finish the panel.
I will finish with, we need to be pragmatic, and apparently all the debates needs to come out with very specific recommendations which are implementable. These debates are very useful, but always finding what is really necessary and making priorities is something that I have a feeling we lack. Very often we want to reach all the issues, but we have to start from somewhere. So towards to be pragmatic and to prioritize things. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, we've heard a lot of, thank you for bearing with us the whole panel. We've actually used the whole time. And we've heard a lot of good recommendations, reiterating all of us the role of the civil society and the business in all of this. And I really hope that our recommendations that are put forward are going to reach the decision makers and open the way for further work on these important topics that we have discussed. Just one final element that I would like to add on the as a cherry on the top of the whole thing is the communication. The communication between all of the stakeholders on the, especially towards the citizens and towards the business on the benefits of the whole process and what it means to them and what is the role for all of them. Thank you all, and thank you for your inputs, and we're looking forward to working on this further.